At Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont, you will find a host of Victorian-era mansions nestled together that have been repurposed into unique, one-of-a-kind dormitories. One such dorm is McDonald Hall, which is where I happen to live. It is full of ornate staircases, beautifully detailed woodwork, and spacious rooms. The whole building is very reminiscent of a castle, spires and all, so I can't help but feel like a princess whenever I descend the stairs. Of course, no castle would be complete without its very own dungeon, and McDonald Hall has just that. Okay, so maybe it's not an actual dungeon, but the basement is so dark and dank that it could easily pass as one. It is here that we find Jake Weisman, a fellow first year at Champlain College.
Naked, come back later.
Jake is rather short and slender, but makes up for it with his gigantic lumberjack beard and feisty personality. Your beard is rather long.
Shut the f*** up.
The two of us met during orientation and bonded over a mutual love for video games and all things nerdy.
My name is Jake Weisman. I'm currently a video game production management major. There are a variety of hobbies that I take part in, such as Magic, Warhammer, and D&D. I play with my friends and, strangers sometimes.
One of Jake's many hobbies that I wasn't familiar with, however, is the famous role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. I'd heard of Dungeons & Dragons before, D&D for short, but never played it myself.
So Dungeons & Dragons is what's known as a fantasy role-playing game. For those of you who are not familiar with role-playing games, it's basically assuming the role of someone who is not yourself and then pretending to be that person. So for example, in real life, I am a college student, but in D&D, I could be some swamp monster monk who goes and fights, demons or something, right? So it's really up to the player to decide who they want to play.
The game consists of adventurers led through a storyline of sorts by a dungeon master, or DM, who decides players' fate along the journey.
A dungeon master is the person who runs the session. So they're basically the facilitator of the fun, is one way to put it as well. It's a lot of responsibility, which a lot of people aren't ready for, and it's a lot of planning, about usually 4 hours for each session, depending on how in-depth you want to go. But it's definitely a very interesting role.
I was thrilled when Jake suggested we play a makeshift game so I could get a better feel for what D&D is all about. It went about as well as you would expect.
And he's going to charge at you. What's your armor class? Where's your character sheet, asshole? Told you to have it out.
Okay, let me get my character sheet. I was deep within a magical forest and had just encountered a group of goblins when our session was interrupted by Mr. Delivery.
Yeah, perfect. I'll be on a sec. Thank you.
Damn Mr. Delivery.
Yeah, I knew that was going to happen.
Jake hasn't always been a seasoned adventurer. His D&D journey first began when he was in his junior year of high school. Before that, though, he knew of the game, but never got the chance to play.
I knew about it growing up. You'd hear about playing D&D. It's a pretty popular thing. And I would always be interested in playing it. It was always this mysterious thing to me. And then finally, when I got in high school, I found my group of friends who also wanted to learn how to play. So we kind of learned together and found it all very interesting.
Once Jake finally found a playgroup of his own, he was hooked. Not only was it fun, it also acted as an escape from reality.
In high school, for me, I was having a lot of family problems, constant clashing with my mother and my brother and stuff. For me, D&D was an escape. I could just kind of put that behind me and I could be someone else for a few hours. And I think that's something a lot of other players do, is to use it as, a tool, as a medium for them to not be themselves.
Before meeting Jake, I had no idea just how meaningful D&D could be. It just seemed like a fun game.
I think that for me and a lot of other people, Dungeons & Dragons is more than just a game for us. There's a lot that we get out of it that's, not just rolling dice and keeping track of stats. It's a lot more than that for many of us. While D&D does have, those aspects of playing someone who you're not, and a lot of times it is people trying to have an escape from the real world, oftentimes we are brought back. Something will trigger it in-game, or there'll be something on our minds, and we'll need to discuss it with the groups, because you're going over a lot of, oftentimes, really, hard to digest things emotionally. While you're playing D&D, a lot of times the players will seek comfort in their other players in the playgroup.
Jake finds that D&D sessions are oftentimes much needed, for a variety of reasons.
Recently, I found myself in a session where we actually all started talking about parental problems that we were having and adapting to the life of a college student. And it just kind of shows you how a game where we're all trying to be someone else, how much of our own personal lives get dragged into it.
It is no wonder, then, that many strong bonds are formed amongst members of D&D playgroups. Jake knows that he can always count on his fellow group members to have his back when he needs it, whether it's assistance with fighting a dragon or help with a difficult personal dilemma. This sense of camaraderie is a whole other side of Dungeons & Dragons that I had never considered before. But Jake's passion for the game and his relationship with his playgroup is like nothing I've ever seen.
It's not a sound. except the goblin falling dead to the floor. And good job on this encounter, so why don't you take a level and go to level 2.
As my first session came to a close, I knew that I'd never be able to think about D&D as just a game anymore, and I have my very own Dungeon Master Jake to thank for that.
No, stop.